Hey, hello everybody. This is Geoff Webb from 360 Insights, and welcome to today's HR Tech podcast. I'm joined today by the eminent and always entertaining Yutaka Takagi from isolved. And Yutaka, welcome. Please, would you take 2 minutes and just introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll get rolling into what is a super fascinating topic.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Yutaka Takagi. I'm the principal product evangelist here at isolved, and where I get to appear on podcasts like these and go to different events and talk with a lot of HR practitioners about what's kind of going on in their world, in their domain, in their industry. And I'm super happy to get this opportunity to chat with you today.
Awesome. Great. Thank you for joining us. Really looking forward to today's conversation, which is going to be about the world of QSRs and what you're seeing there, what's happening in that world. And we're going to cover a fair bit of ground, but I think probably the best place to start would be just to sort of maybe do a quick definition of what a QSR is for those people that don't know.
Yeah, QSR stands for quick service restaurants. It's a segment of the restaurant and sort of food service vertical that really we've certainly found a lot of our customers are in, and one of the there's a sort of number of reasons for that. But really, what sort of differentiates QSR from sort of the full service restaurants that you might be familiar with. Full service would be anywhere you go in. You get seated, and there's, someone brings out a menu, takes your order, right? That's a sort of a full service restaurant. QSRs are going to be more of those counter service type of restaurants where the service is quick. Think you're sort of what we might traditionally call fast food chains and things of that nature. But those are some businesses where really the movement around the business is fast, movement around employment is fast, and that all kind of creates a really dynamic space for us to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Got it. I love it. So okay, so if I'm sitting at the table and someone's taking my order, I'm probably not at a QSR. If I'm up at a counter and I'm making placing an order, then I may well be at a QSR. And yeah, I know iSolved has a lot of customers in that space, and so as a result, you get the opportunity to talk to a lot of those organizations, and you work with a bunch of them. And I'm curious, I it's never an easy space, right? The QSR world is always as you say, a fast moving and a tough space to be in. I feel like at the moment they're facing some pretty unique challenges in a whole bunch of areas. And I'm curious what are you seeing, and really how would you sort of summarize the challenges that you see your QSR customers facing right now?
Yeah, the industry is seeing obviously big change in the pandemic post-pandemic world. Restaurant workers in the sort of service industry were deemed essential workers. And so they kind of had to ride it out while sort of the rest of us sort of in the office jobs were allowed to work remotely or work
Mhm.
from home, things of that nature. And now what we've seen certainly was a big change in that industry, but staffing levels have actually gone back up to sort of pre-pandemic norms. But one of the things that we're seeing that I think we hear a lot in the conversations between, say, the owner operators of, say, a franchise or a general manager of a store location for like corporate owned or franchise locations, is that a big change in the workforce, right? And really it kind of goes back to good old generational conversations that kind of crops up every couple of years. And so now it's really Gen Z, right? The Gen Z workforce, and how do they, how do managers motivate the Gen Z workforce is kind of a key component of the conversation we're hearing.
Yeah, I that is fascinating, and yeah, I could totally see actually because my sense would be that when we talk to QSRs, and certainly I know when you do, you see a lot of the sort of the your typical employees are probably on the younger side. They're coming through doing other things. They may be full time. They may have a part time job while they're at school or college or and so on. And so as a result, you're constantly sort of seeing I almost say a younger and younger generation coming in. Maybe it's just me because I'm getting old and everybody looks young now, but that sort of dynamic, and therefore motivation and sort of management of those employees remains is always the challenge for any organization, any business, whatever. But I think especially acute for those, and it's not easy just to not easy just to throw money at this problem, right? Cost is always a very big factor when we think about what goes on in the world of a QSR. They don't have the margins to throw around, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a low margin business, and it's a business where a certain level of for what we might consider for what other industries would consider enormously high turnover in their
Hmm.
workforce is kind of the norm. And so, a level of turnover, particularly if you have young workforce who are always sort of on the move and geographically on the move. Perhaps they haven't established sort of the loyalties of, say, a full-time job might afford them. So, these managers would say, sometimes you lose a person for, a nickel an hour, right? Difference in their hourly wage can result in losing a person. And so these are definitely, again, yeah, not just money, but really, one of the motivating factors we hear from like the Gen Z workforce is, they want to do work that's interesting. They want to do work where they feel valued. And so I think there's this question and sometimes maybe a little bit of a disconnect between, say, a generation perhaps of our generation who might be the owner, operator, general manager of one of these locations, trying to motivate and connect with
Hmm.
these Gen Z workers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's I think you nailed it, right? And I know when we talked about this in the past, when we've been doing some research with you and talking to some of the iSolved customers in this space too, it's interesting that the expectations of the Gen Z workforce or the younger workforce, one presumes they're Gen Z, they may even at some point be Gen Alpha at some fairly soon coming through. Um, their expectations of what happens in the workplace, um, how they interact with their employer, even, and I think you made a great comment when we talked about this, a couple of months ago. Even their expectations of what the interview process and the hiring process is like is now different from how we may have seen that 10 or 20 years ago, and that forces change, right, in the way that employers are managing their employees.
Absolutely. I mean, we think about, this generation, sort of the digital natives. I think we put that term on sort of the generation earlier, even, right? The millennial generation, but really now truly mobile and social native generation where, they expect to be able to do everything on their phone. Uh, Everything should be, there's the whole, meme of that could have been a text message, that could have been email, right? These kinds of things. You forget email, right? They don't open their emails. So like, everything's going to be via text. Whatever interactions can be done on a phone, right? So yeah, if you think about an interview, if I'm not interviewing on site, it should be via FaceTime chat. It should be via, a mobile interface. Certainly the job application shouldn't be a paper application that I'm going to ask you to come in and fill in the store. It should be something I could just access through the phone, or I get a text message with a link that takes me to the job application perhaps. And then once they're on board as well, right? Things like scheduling, things like managing their personal information. I mean, schedule is a really big component here, right? Again, think of hourly workforce. Maybe they go to school part time, they go to work part time. How do they juggle that? Well, they juggle that through being able to flexibly manage their work schedule, and to be able to say, if I needed cash for a little weekend trip, be able to get an earned wage access, EWA, quick access to my wages before payday comes next Friday. I think these are all points of, I think, flexibility, right?
Mhm.
That's really really important to that workforce.
Yeah, and that's interesting, Yutaka. Thank you. That I think what's interesting there as well is I hear you as you're talking through that. That sounds like as a as the managers of these and the owners and the operators of the quick service restaurants, there's a lot of different things they're having to deal with there. There's a lot of different pressures. Like they don't have money to just throw at motivating people. To your point, you can lose somebody over a tiny amount of extra cash that somebody else may be able to offer. At the same time as the expectations of employees coming in are very high. I want to be able to work this way. I think your point about scheduling it also came through really clearly. That's a real point of potential contention or friction if you can't schedule properly or you're not sure that you can manage your own schedule. So there's a lot to deal with there. There's a lot of challenges. And also, I know from conversations we've had that you lose one or two employees, that immediately has a very quick effect on the customer experience too, right? Because the employees they're right there with the customers, and perhaps much more so than in a lot of other industries too.
Absolutely, right. I mean, it's not really, it's this environment where like unlike a full service restaurant where there's clearly people sort of on the floor of the service area, and then you have the back of house folks who are managing the kitchen and some of the operations. In a quick serve environment, a lot of times it's all sort of one and the same. People moving from, say, the cook station, the fry station, and quickly bagging those the foods, and then being able to serve it right to the person, the customer who's waiting. And so in that sort of an environment where space is limited, time is limited, because again, part of the value proposition of a QSR, quick serve restaurant, is the speed of the
It's the
service.
quick, right? Yes.
It's quick, right? Exactly. So in that kind of an environment, the time and sort of headspace that the managers have to allocate to HR questions, right, of the staffing needs, the scheduling needs, the compliance requirements they have to meet, like those are all sort of competing sort of in the headspace and in literally the physical space
Right.
of the restaurant. We actually commissioned an ethnographic study. We hired an ethnographer to go and look at and watch the operations of some of these quick serve restaurants, and really sort of observe, like, where are the points of sort of, to use your word right there earlier, the points of friction that are
Mhm.
taking place, particularly in that manager employee relationship, because we all know that's really kind of, that even in that space, that relationship remains really critical to,
Yeah.
say, retention and employee sort of satisfaction, engagement.
Mhm.
And yeah, we really learned some of these opportunities. Not everything that we really can directly influence as a human capital management provider per se, but really to be able to understand what are those concerns that take place on the ground in a restaurant. And a lot of those come down to, well, how do they manage the small time and small physical space to do all the things that they need to do as an employer?
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd love to see the results of that at some point too. So yeah, that sounds fascinating. You bring me very nicely though to the next point I really want to make. The next question I want to ask you, which is, okay, again, there's a lot to deal with here. There's a lot of pressures. There's the immediacy, the responsiveness is all required in managing the team and being able to reflect how they want to work. It sounds pretty dire, right? So let's hope that there's some good answers coming out of this. So I like to start at a broad level, and I think just before we get into the specifics of isolved, and again, isolved I know spends a lot of time and energy focused on the challenges and solving the challenges of QSRs. Let's just take a little bit of a step back and sort of think more broadly. What is the sort of role of technology overall in helping organizations solve some of those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, there's some of from a restaurant operation standpoint, a lot of what they might call the sort of back office functions,
Hmm.
managing of inventory, orders, and coupons and campaigns, all those things. Those things tend to be sort of mandated systems, if you will, or if you're a part of a larger franchise, for
Yep.
example, something that the sort of the corporate organization would say, hey, this is part of the package, so to speak. A lot of that is really to simplify the customer experience, right? A customer, if you're going to one of these chain restaurants, no matter where you are, I don't care who the ownership of the restaurant is. I want to be able to go on the app and order on the app, and it
Right.
just goes to the location nearest me. But there's some of these functions that are left to each franchise, each location, perhaps, or each ownership group to decide. And so to be able to fit into that technology ecosystem is important. So certainly that one of the things that we're working on are how do we make ourselves as iSolved and our tools better interoperate with, say, the point of sale systems that these organizations use.
Yeah.
That point of sale tends to be that point where employees are clocking in, for example. If there are tips involved associated with that location, those tips get logged into the point of sales and they have to flow through to the W-2. That's going to be an isolved. So those are all like points of integration that we're certainly looking at.
Hmm.
But from other parts of the technology we certainly see, or that we see the restaurants really focusing on today, would be tools that might help these franchise organizations or the corporate organizations be able to decide where they should expand to next, right? So understanding the
Yeah.
demographics, the geographies, and sort of pockets of the market, so to speak, understand the market
Hmm.
and I help them identify where those growth channels are going to be. Those are like areas we definitely see these groups investing a lot of their sort of technology dollars towards.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, and that brings me again around to the sort of the very obvious point, which is again, iSolve works a lot. You spend a lot of time and energy focused on QSRs. So tell me a little bit about what iSolve's perspective is. What are you doing when you work with a QSR, and often maybe sort of walk me through a little bit of the what that looks like. What's the sort of the cycle of your engagement with a QSR? Where do you start and where do you try and bring them?
Yeah, hiring is ever the challenge,
Mm.
right? QSR. So that talent acquisition component of the human capital management is one part where there's definitely a lot of opportunity to be able to help sort of that time to hire, and even for these sort of evergreen sort of roles that again they're used to there being continuous churn, so they're just going to put a requisition out there that's sort of always open for
Huh.
a certain roles in their organization. And so being able to provide that sort of value through being able to, for example, some of our AI tools that help organizations create the right type of job ad, right, that is going to be attractive to the audience that they're seeking, as well as candidate matching algorithms. We've seen customers realize upwards of 40% faster time to hire. And, that time to hire is only one component. Obviously, time to fit, time to productivity being enormously important as well. But if we can craft the right ad up front, attract the right candidates, get them matched quickly, we can then get them to the floor and productive quicker, right? And so these are all things that are important to be able to get a person sort of on site and productive on the lines as quickly as possible. Another component is like I said, that idea that HR, there isn't physical space for HR
Right.
functions, right? And there isn't necessarily time for a long drawn out conversation about a new policy, et cetera. So we introduced a conversational virtual assistant called Always On HR. So that's a interactive tool there in the iSolve platform where employees sort of at their leisure have 24/7 access to a chat bot, basically, where policies, handbooks, those kinds of details can be uploaded, curated into a knowledge base. So in just sort of natural language interaction, employees can say, "Hey, what kind of well, what's my vacation balance today?" Or, "Hey, when's my next pay date?" These are questions that people can just ask into the chatbot, and we can serve up those answers directly to them, so on demand, right? So that they're not taking that time on the floor between orders, asking their boss for some of these kinds of questions. They can do that on their own time very, very quickly through the mobile app. So, being able to sort of shorten some of those administrative tasks like hiring, onboarding, that's one part. And another part of the focus is the employee experience. How can we make that employee experience simple, enjoyable in a mode that is expected through their mobile phones? So that that they get the questions answered, they get their pay when they want, right? Those kinds of all those kinds of little interactions that make up the employee experience for these workers in these QSRs.
Yeah, I, that's interesting. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the theme there was actually consistently it's quicker and easier, right? So back to the sort of it's quick service, everything has to be quicker. I think that the capacity to reduce sort of finding the right employees and onboarding them and getting them productive by the extent to which you've been able to provably do, I think that's incredibly powerful when I think about the challenges of a QSR. And again, we go back to you lose somebody could just walk off the job in the middle of the shift because they've seen a better offer somewhere else. That's really painful. The more you reduce the time it takes to get those people, and then obviously that's massively important. It reduces the impact of the business, but also your second point, which is then delivering that better, richer employee experience, answering questions more, in an automated way, giving earned wage access earlier and easier, doing it all through mobile. That much better, much more tailored employee experience helps to keep the people. So I think I love the fact that you're, as an organization, you're working at sort of every aspect of this of let's go find the right people, let's go bring the right people in, and let's keep the right people. And that it's no surprise that a lot of QSRs turn to isolved to help them solve exactly those sort of core problems. You actually mentioned in there a couple of times, and I was so tempted to stop you in mid-flow and ask you, but I decided not to because you were covering some really good stuff. But you mentioned a couple of times where I'm going, that sounds like what you're talking about are things like generative AI and natural language processing. We are not allowed. I think it's like a legal requirement. No one's allowed to do a podcast on technology unless you end up wrapping up with some conversation about AI at this point and generative AI and NGL and so on. So let's talk about a little bit about the role that you think AI is playing in those things that we talked about. And I think the second half of that question would be, let's talk a little bit about isolved's perspective on where you're seeing AI come into solving some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that, we really think about for these AI tools, and certainly an area that we're investing a lot into, but we really think about, well, where can that AI really meaningfully add value
Mm-hmm.
to, again, that sort of, if we think about that restaurant manager or the payroll administrator or, HR person, like where can we add value to that day?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about our customers, they're generally going to be small, mid-sized to sort of mid-market kind of organizations, maybe upwards of a couple thousand employees. These are not large enterprises with massive HR staffs
Right.
engaged in creating a ton of benefits content and engagement content. We're talking about a handful of people, maybe one person who's managing all these sort of hiring and decisions, et cetera. And so, how can we really incrementally deliver value to that person? And so, we're not really sort of broadly, bringing in sort of, oh, an agent this and an agent that. We want to say, okay, well, what's a particular use case where, for example, our studies show upwards of 50% of an HR person's time is spent answering pretty repetitive questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we do to alleviate that, right? And that's where always on HR and that conversational virtual assistant really came into being is to really look at that particular statistic and that sort of that reality of what an HR person deals with, and in some cases these restaurant managers are dealing with, the frontline managers deal with, and how can we alleviate some of those pressures so that they can put more focus on the customer experience, for example, or the more meaningful employee experience, rather than command and control of here's the new policy, you got to read it, we got to go through
Right.
like 20 PowerPoints to do it. Hey, you guys can do that on your own. If you have any questions, ask the chatbot and let that answer those questions for you, so that what little time I do have face to face with the employee can be spent on more meaningful conversations around recognition, around incentive, and those kinds of team building exercises that a lot of these folks do. So, when we think about AI, we think about it more from that perspective, really understanding that end user and seeing where can we add value. So when we think sort of, look to the future and say, well,
Mm-hmm.
how might we improve, the employee experience? What are some things that we can give to the employee so that when they're, say, going through a moment of decision, they're going through a benefits enrollment, for example, how can we make that experience simpler by understanding a little bit more about who they are, understanding a little bit about what their life situation is, to then be able to offer up AI-driven suggestions and recommendations on what kind of benefits might be best for their situation. So again, looking at no sort of grandiose proclamations here. AI is not going to solve all the problems. How can we incrementally help the end users? That's kind of what we're looking at.
And I love that too, by the way, because it's grounded in just practical solving problems rather than simply throwing AI at everything and sort of attempting to say that everything's AI. I love the way that you're using it in sort of every stage and every interaction in the right way, in a focused way and in a way to solve the problem. I love it. That's a great strategy. And I can see, in the future, sort of more investment in that sort of approach, as you say, to build out the employee experience. This has been outstanding. Thank you. I think there's a lot of insight here around QSRs. I think a lot about what you see when you do these studies, when you look at what your customers are doing, and also obviously the great work that isolved is doing in helping those QSRs solve those problems in a way that is cost effective and scalable and all the other good stuff that you guys already do for everybody else. So I want to say thank you so much, Yutaka, for joining us. Yutaka Takagi from isolved. My name's Geoff Webb. I'm a contributing analyst at 360 Insights, and this has been an HR Tech Chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.